The collective bargaining process in unionized construction is an important institution. Generally, the discussions are productive with the goal of both labor and management benefiting from a new agreement. But what happens when parties need help moving the discussions along? In this episode of OCS Talks, we look at the role conciliation officers play in working with both parties to reach a mutually beneficial agreement, review how discussions have changed over the years, and talk about some successful strategies to employ when there are challenges at the table.
Welcome to OCS Talks, your source for all things related to Ontario's unionized ICI construction sector.
I'm Brian Barron, CEO of the Ontario Construction Secretariat. Joining me today is Sandra Shime, Director of Dispute Resolution Services at the Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. Sandra is also a valued member of our own OCS Board of Directors. She's a previous litigation lawyer, an assistant district attorney, and really kind of too many volunteering and mentoring roles to mention, along with numerous roles for great work that she's done over the past. And most importantly, a really good friend of mine and of the industries as well. So Sandra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brian. So thanks for having me on the podcast. I really have love working with the OCS, and I knew you when you were at the Ministry of Labour, and now I'm really excited to see all the good things you're doing as CEO of the OCS and to talk to you on this podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And with I got to say, going through and kind of researching your bio and everything else, I knew you were special, but I had no idea you'd done all those different things. So thank you so much. And I'm sure you bring a wealth of knowledge to this. So I'm really interested to kind of hear your perspectives on some of what we're going to talk about today. Before we jump in, you've obviously done a fair bit of work, both in Canada and the US. And I'm just kind of curious, how did you end up as the Director of Dispute Resolution Services with the ministry?
Thanks, Brian. I've been lucky to have a really interesting career. And how I ended up here is I worked as a criminal prosecutor in the United States. And when I moved back to Canada for family reasons, I shifted back into the labor world, which as an adjudicator, and as many of you may know, my father was a labor arbitrator. So coming back into labor is really like coming back home to me. That's what I grew up with and learning from him. I then worked as an adjudicator for about 13 years at a tribunal. And when I saw this job ad, I applied as I thought it would be kind of the perfect mix of my various roles over the years. So bringing to it the legal, the mediation, and then the negotiation piece. So that's sort of a combination of my career journey. And I got lucky to land here, and I've really loved every minute of it since I got here 3 years ago. The team here is so impressive. I think the mediators here are the best in the country in the area of mediating collective agreements. And I've also enjoyed learning and developing and working with people like the OCS, the board of directors at the OCS, and people in the construction industry and other sectors that I hadn't previously worked in.
Great. Thank you. So it's kind of like coming home for you.
Yeah, labor is kind of my natural home. I came home to Canada, came home to labor. So both of those are areas which I really feel passionate about and are both comfortable for me. Oh,
that's excellent. Yeah, thank you. So let's talk a bit about the role that the conciliators play at the bargaining table. So in some cases, they're there to help. They're kind of elected to kind of come in to kind of help the discussions move along in a productive manner. In other cases, it's really to kind of help both parties find some common ground and overcome some challenging issues. So I'm curious, and I think one of the things that might be helpful for the listeners is kind of knowing, what your guys' perspective is, that kind of that conciliator sort of perspective on the negotiations. What do you guys kind of have to add to this? And from your perspective, what do you think our listeners would benefit from knowing?
Most of our team has about 15 to 20 years in bargaining when they come to the ministry. So they're really experts in bargaining and they're experts in dispute resolution processes. So we have former executives from large companies. We have a former executive from the OLG. We also have many former presidents of local unions. So people who really lived and breathed collective bargaining and then came to us as the ministry neutrals. So unlike many other jobs, we go to work every day expecting conflict. So I think that's really one of the big differences. We know when we're walking in, not to every room. There are many amicable groups that we work with, but we do come in knowing we're expecting conflict. And I think that is something different. And we as the neutral can bring to that some of the ability to set aside emotions, both the mediator's experience in bargaining, with bargaining, and also being the third party to bring that neutral sort of third-party perspectives to help parties put aside their emotions and to really focus, what are the issues? Where are the issues? Where are the sticking points? We also work with parties to clarify their positions, help reframe issues. So is this a position you hold, or is this an interest? So what are your interests versus your position? So for example, your position may be, I am refusing to change my view, either union or employer, on the scheduling issue. So what are your interests? Helping people see, well, maybe your interests are working together to figure out a scheduling scenario in your collective agreement that works for everybody in the workplace. So sort of helping people identify sometimes positions versus interests and clarifying those. We also really bring to the table the ability to ask questions, to challenge unrealistic demands or expectations, to understand, what are the industry standards. Since we're at tables every single day, many parties are only at tables every 3 to 4 years. We're at tables every single day. So we have a sense or a pulse of what's going on in either that industry or across multiple sectors. And so bringing that, what are your options? But I think we also enable parties to climb down from difficult positions. What's a graceful exit from a position to bring parties together? Or if you do go on strike and that strike makes sense, how do you return to work? If there's been a toxic strike or lockout, how do you return to work? We help you with a return to work proposal, return to work plan, or gradual return to work, or return to work protocol. So I think we bring sort of kind of a multitude depending on where you are in the bargaining process and what the relationship is. So usually we can clarify positions, improve communications, focus on the shared interests. But I would say to parties, we often tell parties, we're really the experts in dispute resolution processes. You are the expert in your field. We had a mediator was at a table, and they said to him, well, what right do you have to be here? What do you have to say about this? What do you bring to this?
Yeah.
And that's a question, he sort of was taken aback, but he said, well, I actually bring my expertise in dispute resolution, understanding processes, communication, and bringing an outsider perspective. You're the expert in your subject matter. And so I think that's really what we can bring to the table. And that's a perspective that we have every day. And that can make the difference between a deadlock and an agreement.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. So I picked up on sort of the, they've got the ability to take the emotion out of the room. You take a look at it and both sides are really kind of coming in with, a reasonably firm probably position as to kind of where they would like to be. But there is kind of that vested interest in there. Whereas as kind of from the mediation standpoint, you have to have that ability to kind of say, hey, let's kind of take that out. Let's look at what's reasonable and that sort of thing. So in terms of kind of, what you're looking for in a conciliator when you're bringing them on, what would you say are sort of like the top 3 qualities kind of thing that you would find in that person that makes them a really successful conciliator? So
I think being flexible, I think someone who really is good with coming every day to a situation and not knowing what to expect. I mean, a lot of times we'll walk into a situation and sometimes there might be a disagreement about actually where the parties are sitting in a room. So it can be something as simple as like, how do we navigate? And we call, one of my mediators coined it table leadership. How do we navigate even basics? There might be an argument over, we had one file where there was an argument. The employer had provided coffee but they hadn't provided coffee in the union room. And there was an argument about that coffee. We sometimes deal with those things right up front. So having flexibility, I would say, that you walk into a room and it may be about the substance, it may be about the provisions, but it may also be about the arrangements for the meeting. I'd say the second thing is really being unafraid of the emotion and conflict that comes along with bargaining, being able to grapple with that and manage the people, they react. It's a lot of emotions. It's people's work. It's where they spend most of their days. And so how do you manage, being able to manage and stay calm in those circumstances? And I think, the third thing is our mediators come with so much bargaining experience. They really understand the language of collective agreements, and they also understand the legislation. So being able to provide that backdrop as well. And then obviously just adding in a fourth, being creative. We're at tables, as I said, every day. So having the ability to think, be creative in a way that parties who maybe bargain once every 3 or 4 years, we have that creativity we may pull from another sector and bring into this sector. So I'd say that's really the fourth thing, that creativity, thinking outside the box. Is what we look for in mediators. And sometimes that's hard to identify and interview. Those are the things we look for, that flexibility, creativity, thinking on your feet.
So recently I was in a meeting where, somebody was saying, they said, it's interesting because in a lot of cases, you're fighting over the same thing, just in a different way, like from a contractor perspective, it's, we want more work. We want, like we want that business coming in kind of thing. But then from the worker side, they're saying, well, we want more money kind of idea. And it's really the same argument. You're going, if you get more work, there's more money kind of thing. And it's trying to kind of get people to see that same perspective. So yeah, thank you. So let's talk strategy for a minute. So understanding that both parties' goal is ultimately to get really kind of the best deal for their membership while still maintaining competitiveness in the marketplace. What are some of the most successful and productive strategies that you've seen to keep both parties moving in that sort of positive and productive manner?
So I think, you've sort of hit on the inherent tension in most rooms, which is the viability of the business versus the, labor force and what they're looking for. And we're certainly seeing it in the past few years, affordability issues, in groceries and housing, et cetera. So those tensions are really paramount right now. And we're seeing those at the bargaining table. So I think really, a lot of the strategies we use, it really starts with the mediator building credibility and having those relationship building skills, which is another thing we really look for in mediators. So being able to build a relationship with the parties, so that they have credibility to present, the other side, to present what the conversations are. So I'd say the strategy starts from having credibility as a mediator, and that starts with how do we build relationships with parties on both sides so they will listen to us, be able to hear us. And we do that by sort of the reverse, listening to people, asking questions, understanding why they come to their positions, understanding the base for that, and pushing parties to also answer those questions for themselves, because then that will enable us to listen and hear and be able to get to where are the real issues. Is this, as you said, based on a toxic relationship from the past, or is this based on really viability of the business? And so sort of by asking questions, building our credibility, is this an unrealistic or a realistic demand or expectation? And that's where, the skill of a mediator in thinking creatively, thinking on their feet, being in a lot of rooms every day of the year. And so those strategies will come out, depending on what the answers to those questions are, and then what questions we then turn and ask, whether it be union or employer, as part of our trying to find that solution or deal down the road.
It is interesting. So in our last podcast, we did a thing on the fundamentals of construction labor relations, and it was really kind of there's a lot of sort of that trust in the relationship that we're trying to sort of build in, and being able to see things from somebody else's perspective, and that's really kind of the basis for a lot of these things is kind of saying, hey, let's come into the room, let's kind of have that respectful conversation, let's work our way through those problems and see if we can find sort of those creative ways to solve it. So I'm glad to see that end of things is really kind of moving along, which I think is really positive. Now, it's when I take a look at sort of the demographics now and sort of the values of people that are coming up through the workforce, we've got a younger generation that are coming in behind, and that sort of thing. What are some of the strategies that you guys are seeing that maybe worked really well in the past, but may not hold or really kind of get the results that we're looking for now? Like what's some of what we're seeing, sort of that change?
So I think we're seeing a couple things in that direction. I think there is, as the generation of labor representatives sort of age, that some respect, as you said, as the new generation comes into the room, some of that change in tone, more focus on collaborative conversation. So I do think we're seeing that shift. But I'd say also the other big shift we're seeing is we used to always tell parties, no bargaining in the media. And now that isn't the way it is. There is bargaining in the media. People we know are posting on Facebook, they're posting on Instagram, we've got Twitter. So now we're refining our strategies, say, okay, how do we work with you? Recognizing that there is bargaining in the media going on. There is instant access to your management group, to your union membership. So, we use creative methods to, do we have a media blackout? Do we have agreement on joint statements? Do we do a 2 or 3 day blackout media period right before the strike deadline? Like, how do we adapt and recognize that there will be instant communication now on social media? So I'd say that's a change. And then, as you said, a little bit less of the screaming and shouting, and a little bit more thinking, how do we collaborate?
It's got to be really frustrating. So I know one of the things that we've found a challenge here at the OCS is people sort of misusing some of that information, or only kind of taking part of the story. So looking at, say, some wage data without understanding, what's either being given as an additional benefit or something that may have been taken away, which could impact sort of that overall wage package. So it's a different world, because now, somebody can post something to Instagram, Facebook, any of those sorts of things without the full context behind it. Unfortunately, I think it sort of riles people up a little bit without giving them the whole story behind things, which it's got to be a difficult spot, from your guys' perspective, where everybody's trying to sort of bargain in good faith, but something is taken out of context to some degree.
Yeah, but that's where you use your mediators as experts in dispute resolution processes and work with them. And that's where we're at our best, in a way, to help that communication, to rebuild that trust. Or if they don't trust the other side, we as the third party are the trustworthy party who can bring the full story, explain, ask those questions, push people to move outside of that snapshot, or say, how is this going to play in the other room? You're posting X or Y. How is this going to play? How is that going to, asking those questions again. And that's where the expertise of the mediators in processes and saying, let's look at the picture, and not having that emotional aspect to it that we can bring to the table. So I would say, in a way, this heightened social media presence allows us to be even more important in these rooms and in this job, so that correct information is getting passed back and forth. We can reopen communication after it's broken down. I mean, we have had deals where we had one file where there was a deal, it was going for ratification, and then, there was a comms that went out that tanked that deal. That deal did not ratify. So that's, again, where we can go back. We can bring parties. That's another aspect of our work. We can bring people back when they've gone off the cliff. So there's a failed ratification. How do the parties come back to the table? How do we get them back? And that's also our expertise. Let's bring them back where there's been a breakdown in trust, a breakdown in the relationship, or a breakdown in how things were communicated. And that's, again, where we use our skills to figure out, how do we bring parties back to the table? How do we help them come back to have that conversation? And sometimes that means not having a conversation for a while. I mean, one of the techniques we have is, when you're mediating during a strike, it's very different than mediating conciliation and educating. We're finding we're doing a lot of educating of parties now, as we see a new generation of labor leaders come in, and labor reps, a lot more guiding and educating people about the processes. We're spending a lot more time on that to make sure parties understand, when you're going in this direction, what does that look like? What are the avenues? And again, using our knowledge and we have, I think, in our group over 500 years of bargaining experience when you add up all the years of the different mediators. So using that expertise of, like, where do you see this going? In that direction. If you choose to take that direction, that's fine, but know where it's going. And so I think the social media aspect allows us to be even more relevant in some of these rooms to help bring parties back after that credibility or relationship is broken down.
It's interesting because when you talk about things like trust and that sort of stuff, it's once the trust is gone between partners, it becomes very difficult to bring it back. And it would be quite a skill set to be able to kind of bring people back into the room to have those productive conversations when there's sort of skepticism that's in behind everything based on sort of what's happened in the past. So that'd be a tricky scenario. So now, in terms of, this past round, and again, I'm not going to talk specifics with about anybody because there's still bargaining that's happening, but I have heard sort of through the grapevine a number of really positive stories where people found this round a little bit different, where they, there was definitely a shift in sort of the relationship towards the more positive. A lot of it had to do with training. So whether they had taken sort of the training through the OCS or they had taken training through one of the universities, where they had sort of both parties kind of come together, it really shifted I would say it brought the temperature down in the room. It allowed for some more productive conversations and that sort of stuff. Have you noticed any other trends out there that have really impacted kind of, the discussions over the past little bit, where folks have made a real concerted effort towards something kind of thing that's yielded some pretty good results?
Well, I think sort of to your point, and actually, the OCS, having that where relationships are built in the in-between period. And we often encourage parties to build their relationships, whether it be through good labor management, practices like good labor management committees during the interim, good health and safety committees to keep that communication open, and things like the OCS where you've people from both sides coming together and engaging. Those are always going to help. Like, those relationships are always going to help in the bargaining period. We're seeing some of those positive trends in construction, but we're also seeing the tensions, as you mentioned, especially right now, between the viability of businesses, especially in a time where we're facing, external threats to our economy, and then affordability issues. So we're sort of balancing both some of the positives, but also just the realities into the external world, which we don't have any control over, which are stuff like tariffs and, as I said, some inexperienced representatives. So that's where, we're able to come in and work with the parties to overcome some of those things, or to grapple with them. How do we grapple with some of these external threats to us and to the deal as mediators with both parties? So I wouldn't say I have one answer to that question. I think each round takes on its own flavor or own rhythm, or as we call it, the theater of collective bargaining. I think this has a lot of the relationship building, whether it be through the OCS. We also, the mediators, we went out 2 years ago and then a year ago and started really working with the parties, getting to know, building our relationships in the OCS community. And I think that's also allowed for some deals as well, building our relationships with the community, and the OCS's work together. And so I think that's played a positive role as well.
I do find it really encouraging that you've kind of brought your staff to really a lot of our events, put them through our training, because construction labor relations is a different animal. When you look at really, you've got certainly the uncertainty due to things like tariffs and everything else, but then you've also got the uncertainty for the workers in terms of cost of living and that kind of thing, and that housing affordability. There's a lot of pressures there coming in from all different angles that have to be considered, and they do come out in these tables, and they're very emotional kind of, conversations and negotiations. So, bringing your mediators to a lot of this training, exposing them to the construction side and putting that concerted effort behind sort of really showing kind of the difference between, kind of the nature of construction and maybe some, if you were to look at, say, like the manufacturing world, something like that, they're two very different animals. So really trying to have sort of that understanding as to kind of what the complexity is between the two, I think is really, really important. Now, in terms of kind of closing thoughts on this, one of the driving force behind this podcast, this episode, was really trying to give that third perspective. And most of our listeners are either going to be on the contractor side or on the union side of things, and they may not be as tuned into sort of that middle ground, that the role that you guys play. And I'm just kind of curious here. I know we've talked a lot about sort of what we've seen about, from trends, training, that sort of stuff. We've talked about some different strategies and that sort of stuff. But I guess if there was just a couple things that you could throw out there that are really kind of meaningful steps on behalf of both parties before they come into that room to kind of have that discussion, is there anything that you kind of want to close with to say, hey, I really wish they would do X kind of thing?
I think I would say really is like engage with your conciliation officer early, even if you're not using them right up front. Engage with them, get to know them, help them understand the issues. As I said, we really see you as experts. As you said, construction's one animal. We are also in, the university sector is another animal. We're in all sectors. So really engage with your conciliation officer, get to know them, and use them where you can when you come up against, as you said, those stumbling blocks or challenges. And we really see you as the experts in the field of construction. So contractors or unions out there talking or listening to this podcast, they're really the experts. But how can we provide value added and engage with you in a way that we can move that along when you hit those stumbling blocks? Don't just engage us at the last emergency. Get to know us early. Talk to us. And then we can be of benefit in that time. I also think, as I said earlier, having really good labor management relations. I saw one contractor in the last 3 years really reach out and spend a lot of time working with their unionized partner. And I've also seen that through the OCS, the attempts by contractors to work with their unionized trades and vice versa, the unionized trades to work with contractors to build those relationships, whether it be through good practices in their health and safety committee, good practices with labor management, handling grievances together so that when you come to the table, there's some of that relationship already there. And then the mediator can work with you to push you over the edge if you're close to a deal or if you hit stumbling blocks there. So that may have been a longer answer than what you asked for, but I think that's probably my best advice.
No, I think it is good because, when you consider the fact that it is a true symbiotic relationship, right? I mean, you've got the contractors and workers ultimately working for the same goal. It's just trying to make sure that both are benefiting along the way is really kind of the goal behind this. But it's kind of that understanding that, each party needs one another to be able to actually carry out this business. So having those early talks, building that relationship, building the trust heading into these sorts of things. And then, for sure, reaching out to the conciliation officer early to kind of walk them through sort of the process so they're not coming in totally cold probably on this as well, would definitely be helpful. Well, at this point here, I'd really like to thank you, Sandra. I really appreciate your time today on OCS Talks. For more information on today's podcast, even for registration on our upcoming courses on the fundamentals of construction labor relations, as well as resources from the OCS, please visit our website at iciconstruction.com and follow us on social media. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. I always enjoy chatting with you.
Thank you.
Ontario Construction Secretariat. Knowledge to build on. Visit iciconstruction.com to learn more.